McLean, Virginia. If you are familiar with the geography of the American power structure, just saying the name McLean conjures up a very specific image.
Right, it does.
We are not talking about a typical suburban sprawl here. We are talking about the nerve center of the Washington elite.
Exactly.
It is an area defined by, heavy foliage, long driveways, and a pervasive sense of privacy.
It is an environment designed for discretion.
Yeah.
I mean, McLean is where the people who run the country go to turn off the noise. It is manicured, orderly, and generally very quiet. It is the last place you expect to see the chaotic, messy reality of violent crime spilling out onto a front porch.
And yet, that is exactly where we are centering our discussion today. We are looking at a residence on Ted's Lane.
Yes.
It is a quiet street. And in the middle of a sweltering July afternoon in 2011, a tragedy took place there that didn't just disrupt the neighborhood. It sent a shockwave through the entire medical and psychiatric community of the Mid-Atlantic region.
We are analyzing a homicide-suicide. But to leave it at that, to just use the legal terminology, really does a disservice to the complexity of the lives involved here. This wasn't a random act of violence.
No, it wasn't.
It was a collision between a highly respected psychiatrist and a patient he had been treating for over a decade.
It is the ultimate nightmare scenario for anyone involved in mental health. We often talk about the healer archetype, the person who dedicates their life to fixing others. But what happens when the lines blur?
Right.
What happens when the illness you are treating spirals out of control in a way that is completely invisible to the outside world and perhaps even obscured to the doctor himself?
The tone of this analysis needs to be very precise. We are dealing with the loss of two highly intelligent, accomplished people. We need to strip away any sensationalism and look at the clinical and biographical facts.
Exactly. We need to understand who these people were before that afternoon in July.
Our mission is to reconstruct the lives of Dr. Mark Alan Lawrence and Barbara Ann Newman from their biographies right up to the events that unfolded. We have a stack of sources here: articles, obituaries, police reports, and colleague statements. We're going to go through their backgrounds, the evolution of their doctor-patient relationship, the specific warning signs that were missed, and the broader implications for patient safety and medical confidentiality.
It is, at its core, a story about the limits of prediction.
Absolutely. It is about how difficult it is to foresee violence, even when you're an expert in human behavior.
Let's begin with the victim of the homicide, Mark Alan Lawrence.
Yeah.
When you go through the documentation on his life, you get the sense of someone who was a pillar of the establishment. He wasn't just a participant in his field, he was a shaper of it.
Mark Lawrence was 71 years old when he died. He was born on December 9th, 1939. His origins were in Gary, Indiana, which is a very different world from McLean, Virginia.
Very different.
But his trajectory was consistently aimed toward high achievement. He graduated from Amherst College in 1961.
I want to pause on that Amherst connection for a moment. In the sources, there is a recurring mention of the class of 61.
Yes, that comes up a lot.
It wasn't just a graduation year for him. It was an identity. Later, after the tragedy, the statement released by his classmates was incredibly poignant. It speaks to a generation of men who viewed their education as a mandate to serve.
He moved to Washington, D.C. in 1969. If you consider the historical context, moving to D.C. in 69 places him there right at the height of social and political foment. He entered the mental health field during a period of radical change in how we treat and understand psychological disorders.
He started as a group therapist around 1974, but he clearly had an entrepreneurial spirit as well, because in 1984 he founded the Center for Healing and Imagery, known as CHI, in McLean.
He didn't just practice there, he built an institution. And he remained a professor there until the end of his life. But his resume is much more extensive than just private practice. He was a mentor. That word comes up constantly in the literature we're reviewing.
He held teaching positions at Harvard Medical School, the Massachusetts Mental Health Center, and the Georgetown University School of Medicine.
He was also on staff at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. For those who don't know, St. Elizabeth's is a historic institution in D.C. It handles some of the most difficult, chronic cases in the nation. It is not an easy place to work. It requires a tremendous amount of patience and clinical fortitude.
He also had a career at the National Institute of Mental Health.
The NIMH, right. But what I find most telling are the descriptions from his peers. Susan Drobus, a clinical social worker who knew him for 25 years, said he assisted in the careers of hundreds of professionals.
That is a legacy that goes beyond just treating patients. He was treating the doctors.
Precisely. Drobus specifically mentioned that young psychiatrists would come to him when they hit an impasse, When they had a patient they just couldn't reach, or a case that was too complex, they went to Mark Lawrence. He was the fixer.
He was willing to take on the disturbed and complex patients that other professionals might have avoided.
That is a critical point to understand regarding his character. He did not shy away from difficulty. He moved toward it.
Now, this willingness to engage with complexity leads us to the most surprising aspect of his biography. This is the part that really sets him apart from your average suburban psychiatrist. In the 1990s, Mark Lawrence worked for the Central Intelligence Agency.
It is a fascinating divergence in his career path. He is brought in to assist with the psychological profiling of foreign leaders.
Let's unpack what that actually means. This isn't sitting on a couch asking a dictator about his childhood. This is at a distance profiling.
Exactly. This is a highly specialized field developed by people like Gerald Post, who is actually a colleague of Lawrence. The task is to construct a psychological model of a target without ever meeting them. This could be a head of state, a terrorist leader, or a diplomat.
How do they do that?
You analyze their speeches, their biographical data, their decision-making patterns during crises, and their body language in videos. It is incredibly meticulous work.
It requires a massive amount of intuition and a staggering ability to synthesize disparate information. You have to get inside the head of someone who might be thousands of miles away and predict what they will do next.
It speaks volumes about his analytical prowess. He was trained to see the unseen, to connect dots that weren't obvious to others. He was analyzing the personalities of world leaders to help the government understand their vulnerabilities and their potential for aggression.
There is a bitter irony there.
Very much so.
Here is a man skilled at predicting the behavior of dangerous people he has never met, yet he was unable to predict the danger sitting in his own waiting room.
That is the paradox we are facing. But we also have to reconcile this analytical CIA-connected side of him with his demeanor. By all accounts, he was not a cold, detached analyst.
Melvin Stern, a psychiatrist who had known him since the 70s, described him as warm and engaging.
Cynthia Margalis, another colleague, said the exact same thing. He was a good listener. Gerald Post, the same man who pioneered that CIA profiling technique, said Lawrence had a unique ability to combine professional rigor with genuine compassion.
By 2011, he was winding down. He was 71, he was semi-retired, he wasn't running a massive clinic anymore. He was seeing a handful of long-term patients out of his home office on Tebbs Lane.
And that home setting is crucial to the narrative. It implies a level of intimacy and informality. It is not a sterile hospital suite with security guards and metal detectors. It is a house.
It creates a different dynamic entirely.
It does. And we must mention his personal life. He was married to Karen Lawrence. In July 2011, Karen was facing a severe health crisis. She had suffered a stroke and was bedridden, receiving home care.
So on the day of the event, she was physically present in the home, but incapacitated.
Yes. He also had a daughter, Catherine. So we have a full picture of Mark Lawrence, a brilliant, warm, highly accomplished man who was transitioning into a quieter phase of life, caring for his wife and maintaining his practice for a select few.
Now we need to construct the profile of the other individual involved. Barbara Ann Newman.
Barbara Newman was 62 years old in 2011. If you look at her biography on paper, without knowing the end of the story, she looks remarkably similar to Dr. Lawrence. She wasn't an outcast, she was a peer.
She was an intellectual heavyweight. She grew up on Long Island and attended a top-tier public high school.
She went to Smith College, where she earned her degree in psychology. But she didn't stop there. She pivoted to the hard sciences.
She earned a PhD in immunology from Columbia University.
A Columbia PhD is a significant achievement. It requires discipline, high intelligence, and the ability to conduct complex research. She began postdoctorate work in 1986 and eventually secured a position as a researcher at the National Institutes of Health.
So just like Lawrence had his connection to the NIMH, she was embedded in the NIH. These are the premier medical institutions of the country. She was a scientist.
She also had an interest in social work. Acquaintances noted she had a drive to help people, much like Lawrence did, but by 2011, her career had ended. She had retired.
The timing of that retirement is interesting. It happened shortly after her mother's death in early 2007.
She had been living in Vienna, Virginia, which is just a short drive from McLean, for about a decade.
The retirement was described as being that personal choice, but it coincided with a period of significant personal loss. And this is where we begin to see the erosion of her stability.
Let's look at that timeline of loss. It starts back in April 2001. In 2001, she lost her brother, Stephen. He was 56 years old and died of a stroke. The sources indicate she was deeply affected by this.
She didn't have a large family network, so the loss of a sibling was a major structural blow to her support system.
Then, in 2007, her mother passed away. Her mother had been living in Florida but visited frequently. When her mother died, Barbara Newman was essentially left without any immediate family in the area.
This led to a life of isolation. She lived alone, she kept to herself.
But, and this is very important for understanding how she flew under the radar, she wasn't a shut-in the traditional sense. She maintained a facade of normalcy.
Betty Erickson, a neighbor, provided a quote that is central to this whole mystery. She said Newman seemed very intelligent and normal.
That observation is key. Normal. Erickson noted she never saw any anger or violent tendencies. Newman would hire the neighbors' children to do chores, like mowing the lawn or moving furniture. She interacted with the community in a way that was socially acceptable.
A friend, Lisa Boyd, even remarked that she thought Newman was getting better during this period. She said Newman valued life.
This is the mask of high-functioning mental illness. You have a woman with a PhD, a woman who knows how to behave in society, who is intelligent enough to conceal the turmoil happening inside her mind.
But the reality was that she had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
And she was incredibly private about it. Former coworkers at the NIH had no idea. She kept that part of her life completely compartmentalized.
So we have these two lives running parallel, the doctor and the scientist. Now we need to look at how they intersected.
Newman met Lawrence around 1999. This was shortly after she moved to the McLean and Vienna area. We're looking at a treatment relationship that spanned roughly 12 years.
12 years? That is a lifetime in therapy. You build a profound bond in that time.
You do. But in the case of paranoid schizophrenia, that bond can become the subject of the delusion. By July 2011, Newman's condition was deteriorating rapidly. She was suffering from severe paranoia.
And the specific nature of that paranoia was focused entirely on Dr. Lawrence.
She developed a fixed pathological belief that Dr. Lawrence was controlling her life. She believed he was the source of her unhappiness, that he was to blame for all her problems.
This is a phenomenon we see in these tragic cases, the benevolent persecutor.
Yes.
The person who is trying to help becomes the architect of the patient's suffering in their mind.
It is a terrifying inversion of reality. Because she trusted him for so long, the betrayal she perceived in her delusion was absolute. If the person who is supposed to save you is actually destroying you, that creates a level of desperation that can lead to violence.
We have to move now to the week leading up to the tragedy, because there were signs. This wasn't a lightning strike from a clear blue sky.
No, it wasn't. The escalation was visible to Lawrence. On July 21st, 2011, the day before the murder, Lawrence met with his old friend, Melvin Stern.
He confided in Stern. He was worried.
He was. He told Stern specifically that Newman thinks he is to blame for all her problems. He recognized the transference had turned toxic.
And Stern gave him advice.
Stern advised him to transfer the case. He told him to get an outside consultation or hand her over to another doctor. It was sound clinical advice. When a patient becomes fixated on the therapist in a paranoid way, treatment can no longer proceed effectively.
Lawrence agreed. He said he would do it, but, and this is the moment where everything pivots, he didn't seem afraid.
That is the fatal miscalculation. Lawrence conveyed no fear to Stern. He did not view Barbara Newman as a physical danger to herself or to him. His daughter, Catherine, later confirmed this. She said that while her father had dealt with boundary issues with other patients in the past, he never expressed deep concern about Newman.
Why do you think that is? He was a CIA profiler. He was the fixer. Why did he miss the threat?
It is likely a combination of factors. First, the duration of the relationship. He had known her for 12 years. If she hadn't been violent in 12 years, he probably assumed she wouldn't start now. He relied on the baseline behavior he knew.
That makes sense from a human perspective.
Second, she was a professional. She was a scientist. It is often harder to view someone of that social and intellectual stature as a physical threat compared to someone with a history of street violence or criminality. We all carry biases about what danger looks like.
He saw the suffering, but he didn't see the weapon.
Precisely. He likely believed he could talk her through the transfer. He believed in the therapeutic alliance, even as it was crumbling.
This brings us to Friday, July 22, 2011, the day it happened.
The timeline of that day contains a detail that is baffling to the rational mind.
You are talking about the conversation with the neighbor.
Yes. Around 3:30 p.m., Barbara Newman is at her home in Vienna. She's preparing to leave for her appointment. She speaks to a neighbor.
And she asks for a favor.
She asks the neighbor if he can help her change some smoke detectors that were failing. But she asks him to do it the following morning.
That detail stops me in my tracks every time I review the timeline. She is about to drive to McLean with a gun in her purse to kill her doctor and herself. Why is she scheduling home maintenance for Saturday morning?
It is a profound example of the fractured nature of psychosis.
Hmm.
It suggests that her mind was capable of holding two completely contradictory realities simultaneously. In one reality, she's a responsible homeowner ensuring her sire's safety. In the other, she is on a mission of annihilation.
Or perhaps it shows ambivalence. Was she unsure if she was going to go through with it?
It is possible.
Mm.
Or it could be a sign of high-functioning executive control operating independently of the delusion. She could plan for the future even while planning to end it. It highlights how normal she could appear even minutes before the violence. She wasn't raving or acting erratically to the outside world.
So she leaves her house, she gets in her car, and drives the few miles to McLean, to 862 Olive Tebbs Lane.
She arrives around 4 p.m. This was a scheduled appointment. She didn't break in. She wasn't lurking in the bushes. She walked to the front door.
Mark Lawrence was working. He was just finishing a session with another patient.
The previous patient left. Lawrence came downstairs to the waiting area. He saw Newman. He did what he probably had done 1,000 times. He asked her to wait a few minutes while he finished his notes or prepared the room.
Just give me a minute. A completely mundane request.
Lawrence turned to walk back up the stairs to his office.
And that is when it happened.
Barbara Newman pulled a pistol from her belongings. She didn't wait. She fired several shots at Lawrence.
He was killed instantly.
The shots rang out through the house. Remember, his wife Karen was bedridden in another room. She heard this.
The police received the call at 4:15 p.m.
The Fairfax County Police Department responded immediately. When they arrived, the scene was already silent.
They found Dr. Lawrence inside. Where was Newman?
They found her on the outside porch. She had walked back out of the house.
And she had turned the gun on herself.
Yes. A self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. She was pronounced dead at the scene.
In the span of 15 minutes, 2 brilliant, accomplished lives were extinguished, and the community was left with absolutely no answers.
The reaction was immediate shock. The medical communities in Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. were reeling.
The tributes started pouring in. The Amherst class of '61 released a statement honoring his service. The American Psychiatric Association issued a formal response.
Roger Peel, the secretary of the APA, made a point to highlight Lawrence's courage. He called him a caring person who dared to work in fields that not many psychiatrists dare to enter. He was referring to those difficult cases, the ones that carry inherent risk.
But the investigation into the motive, we know why she did it in a delusional sense, but the why of the violence is harder to pin down for investigators.
John Lyon, a clinical professor at the University of Maryland, provided some context on this. He noted that statistically, a mental health professional is murdered by a patient in the U.S. every 2 or 3 years.
Every 2 or 3 years. That makes it a rare event, but a persistent one.
It is a known occupational hazard. But Lyon pointed out that usually there are markers. The 2 biggest risk factors are substance abuse and a history of repetitive criminal behavior.
And Barbara Newman had neither.
She had 0 criminal record. She had no history of addiction. She did not fit the profile of the dangerous patient. She was a researcher. She was a neighbor. She was the woman who asked about smoke detectors. This anomaly forces us to look at the mechanisms of severe, isolated mental decline.
This brings us to the difficult conversation about confidentiality and the duty to warn.
This is the ethical tightrope that mental health professionals walk every day. Lawrence was worried. We know that from his conversation with Melvin Stern. But he kept her file confidential.
His daughter confirmed he never broke that trust.
The law, often referred to as the Tarasoff rule, generally mandates that a therapist must break confidentiality if there is an imminent threat of harm to a specific person. But imminent is the key word. Lawrence didn't believe the threat was imminent. He didn't believe he was in danger.
So he protected her privacy until the very end.
He honored his professional code. And in this specific, tragic instance, that adherence to code may have prevented him from taking more drastic protective measures, like involving law enforcement or hospitalizing her involuntarily.
It is worth noting that just a week before this happened, the president of the APA, John Oldham, had published an article about the dangers psychiatrists confront.
The timing is incredibly eerie. The conversation was happening in the abstract and medical journals, while the reality was unfolding in a living room in McLean. It shows that the profession is well aware of the risks, but managing them on a case-by-case basis remains incredibly difficult.
When we step back and look at this entire story, what are we left with?
We are left with the devastating loss of potential. You have Mark Lawrence, a man who spent his life mentoring others, helping the CIA understand global threats, and fixing the most broken patients. His contributions to the field of psychiatry and national security were immense.
And you have Barbara Newman, a woman of immense intellect, a scientist who contributed to the NIH, who was slowly, quietly eroded by a disease she fought to hide from the world.
It underscores the unseen struggle of mental illness. High-functioning individuals can suffer just as profoundly as those who are visibly in distress. Intelligence is not a shield against psychosis. In fact, it can sometimes make the delusions more complex and harder to dismantle.
And it serves as a stark reminder of the unpredictability of human behavior. Even for an expert like Lawrence, who made a career out of profiling the unknown, the mind of his own patient remained a mystery until it was too late.
It is a tragedy for the families, for the class of '61, and for the hundreds of doctors Lawrence mentored. It is a sober reminder of the risks inherent in the profession of healing. It forces us to examine the boundaries of care and the profound vulnerability of those who try to mend the human mind.
I want to leave you with a final thought on the nature of expertise. We build systems and protocols to predict and prevent harm. We train professionals for decades to recognize patterns. Yet, human consciousness remains the most volatile variable we have ever encountered.
Truly.
Thanks for listening.